Okay, how are we doing this morning? Good. This is everyone who behaved last night, and that's good? No? Before we get started, just I guess the public service announcement. I was asked to remind everyone to fill out the surveys, either the paper ones, so you can hand them out on your way out the door, or use it through the app. That would be great. So welcome to Wireless Insecurity. My name is Brad, also known as Brad here in the Spiceworld community. I'm a consultant for a company called Internal IT Limited, who's an IT service provider and what we call value-added reseller, based in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. So this session is really targeted towards the average IT pro who works for the sub 500 user companies in the SMB market. Those of us who fit that category often have to be a jack of all trades, which makes it very difficult to stay on top of everything in the rapidly changing IT space. And security, though we all recognize its importance, is one area where unfortunately we're losing ground on. So today I want to basically go over wireless networks, how they operate, and where some of their flaws are, so you have a better understanding of their operations, and so you can kind of make some steps to better improve security in your environments. Over the next 40 to 50 minutes, we'll look over a bunch of different wireless protocols. While evaluating them, we're going to look at their strengths, if any, and of course their weaknesses. If the demo gods smile kindly upon me today, I hope to show a couple live demos that just emphasizes the fact that some of the exploits on wireless are very trivial to execute, so they should be seen as a plausible threat in your organizations. I'll also touch on a few lesser known aspects about how wireless works, and then cover a few additional recommendations I might have not touched on throughout other parts of the presentation. So, I'm not going to be doing anything malicious to your devices here, but some of my demos, like I said, do emphasize underlying flaws in wireless. So if you don't want your devices, laptops, tablets, smartphones, whatever, to be part of that, just take a quick moment to turn off the wireless. There we go. Okay. So before we go into means for securing your networks, I thought it'd be prudent to talk about why we want to do this in the first place. When you boil it down, we have three main objectives for providing wireless security. The first is we do it for data confidentiality. We want to protect our communications from digital eavesdropping. We also do it for access control. We want to dictate who's allowed on our network and prevent any unauthorized access to them. And we also do it for data integrity. We want to ensure the integrity of the data while it's in transmission. These are just all the three basic things to keep in mind when you're making your decisions around deploying wireless. So the first one we'll go over is open wireless or unsecured. I truly trust that no one here is actually using this as a means of providing connectivity, but we're going to go over it because our users will use it whenever it's available, and the more we can educate them on its dangers, the better the chances are they'll start to take steps to protect themselves and our company. And I'll turn off. So many businesses like hotels, coffee shops, the Austin Convention Center provide free open Wi-Fi. They do this as a means to entice people to their establishments, but they're actually providing a disservice. Since there's no authentication required to connect to the network, that also means there's no encryption being used. So all of the user's data is just floating in the air, free for anyone to grab. You also really don't know who the attackers are anymore. They could be sitting in a parking lot outside the coffee shop, working in a nearby building, or sitting in a coffee shop not even using a laptop. To kind of emphasize the point that your attackers aren't the stereotypical guy sitting in the back of the coffee shop restaurant wearing a hoodie, dark sunglasses, staring intently at a sticker-covered laptop. I created this little device for around $20 that I affectionately called the cow pie. Basically, it's capturing open wireless with a Raspberry Pi. And that's all it is. It's a Raspberry Pi Zero. I did this before the W's were out. It has a management or a wireless card that supports management mode, using just a small little drone battery, and on startup it has a tiny script that just surveys the area for any open wireless networks, finds the one with the most active traffic, and starts capturing it. I really wanted to bring this to show it off, but then when you kind of look at it, I realized it wouldn't look very good when the TSA scanned my luggage. so it's safe at home. And also, I guess to say, just as far as scale, that little notebook is probably about 3 inches by 5 inches at the most, so it's quite small and easily concealed. But anyways, as you can see, open wireless gets a big red X when it comes to data confidentiality. But what about access control and data integrity? For access control, that's also a big fat fail. Many users are fooled into thinking they're safe because whatever or establishment they're connecting to is using some form of a captive portal. Basically a web landing page that they're redirected to where they're required to accept the terms and services, or more often than not, enter some form of password to show that they're doing business with that company and not being a freeloader. It's actually a fail on 2 levels. It's of course still a confidentiality fail because though they enter a password that makes them feel safe, there's still no encryption going between the client devices and the access point. It's also an access control fail. Because what happens when they put in their password, basically their MAC address or IP is whitelisted for a predefined period of time. It is super trivial for someone to change their MAC address to match one of an already approved client to gain access to the network. This also applies to the paid hotspot services. So those are the ones like premium speeds at hotels, in-flight service on airplanes as well. There's also numerous attacks that will affect the integrity of the data. One of the most common involves a technology called the evil twin. So the evil twin is just basically an access point. What the attacker will do, they'll have it up and running with the same or similar SSID of one that's expected to be found in the area. And of course without any security on it, so people will connect to them. They'll also try to improve the signal strength, usually just being in closer proximity to their victims. But once the victim connects to the evil twin, the attacker is in full control of the data. Okay? They can redirect legitimate web requests to bogus captive portals used to harvest credentials or financial information, or redirect them to sites containing malware. And on top of that, they can alter the data coming to and from. And just like any open network, they can capture and keep a copy for themselves. There's also, I guess you could say, other ways that the attacker can force their victims onto their access points. The most common of these makes use of the management frames that are defined in the 802.11 standard, in particular the deauthorization or disassociation frame. In this scenario, the attacker, they're just going to set up their evil twin to have the same SSID as their target. Then they're going to use one of numerous free tools to kick the client off the legitimate network, basically performing a DOS or denial of service attack. And since the evil twin is using the exact same SSID, the client devices are going to connect to that automatically, almost always with the user having any idea what's happened, not even noticing the switch. Now there's also a more subtle method. This is the use of beacon request response. This is one of the fundamental flaws in how wireless actually operates. This beacon response tends to target, I guess, smart devices or basically really any device that doesn't currently have an association with a wireless network. So we all know that little checkbox that says connect automatically when available, and that's ticked by default every time you connect to a new wireless network. Huge convenience factor, pretty much necessary for our users to connect to the network every morning without getting us involved. But like most things made to make our lives easy, it can be exploited. For this automatic connection to happen, your client devices are sending out beacons, looking for their known networks to see if they're in range. Basically what's happening here is, I guess the simplest way to put it is, think of your devices yelling out the name of every single network that they've ever connected to, all in the clear, hoping that one can hear it and allow the connection. All the attacker does is basically set their device to reply with, hey, yes, I'm the network you're looking for. Come connect so we can play. This brings me to the first demo here. I've had my own, I guess, evil twin or Wi-Fi pineapple running since just after I took down the first slide, or warning slide, I should say. Again, I'm not doing anything malicious, not capturing, intercepting any packets or anything like that. But what I am doing is responding to your beacon requests. I'm also doing this as passively as possible. So if anyone had an association with a network, I didn't deauthorize you off there. And I also didn't rebroadcast any SSIDs I found, which would have greatly improved my chances. But I'm sure I still got somebody. So, in the last 8 minutes, I discovered 188 new SSIDs, and 9 of you are connected to me without knowing it. That's the fun of beacon response and requests. I guess I didn't mention in my last presentation, but really your only defense against this is don't turn on your wireless. That's about it. So I'm sure some of you are wondering, why are we spending so much time talking about open wireless? The truth is, it is, like I said earlier, the greatest danger to our end users. In 2015, there's approximately 50 million open hotspots worldwide. That number is expected to grow to over 300 million by the end of next year. Doing the math, that's roughly one open wireless network for every 20 people on the planet. On top of that, I believe it was the AARP, or formerly known as the American Association of Retired Persons, did a study, and what they found was over 25% of people who use open hotspots admitted to doing financial transactions, e-commerce, banking, whatnot, while using those connections. And granted, finally, most sites are moving to SSL exclusively, HTTPS. However, when you're the man in the middle, it is trivial to use your own certificate to decrypt the traffic, gain access, and really we know the users are going to click past any browser warnings that pop up. So what can we do to protect ourselves, our company, and our users from these dangers? Surprise, we got to do end user training and education. But about what in particular? First and foremost, we need to keep it simple. They don't need to know, nor do they care about beacon requests or how the evil twin works. What they need to know is that it is dangerous to do personally identifiable information or company information while using these services. One of the few techy things you might want to show them is how not to connect to every single network that's in sight. And really today, with mobile data plans getting so cheap and we're seeing a lot of unlimited plans being offered, why not use those instead? It's going to be more secure and probably faster as well. There's also VPN services, whether they connect to your corporate network or use one of those hundreds of VPN services that are basically marketed purely for the fact of protecting your traffic locally at an open hotspot and watching out of region content. And if you're providing an open network for any reason whatsoever, just put a password on it. You can plaster that password all over the walls. You can even change the SSID to be use password as the password. Because the sheer act of having that password is encrypting the communication between the client and the access points. So let's move on to some attempts to try to improve wireless security. When wireless was first in its infancy, there really wasn't any security. But when the 802.11 standard was finally ratified in, I think it was 2007, it came along with WEP, which stands for Wired Equivalent Privacy, as its means to provide security. It was only a few years later when 802.11a started rolling out publicly, WEP was found to be broken and severely flawed. But yet, 20 years later, it can still be found in the wild. Just last year alone, I was in a hotel in downtown Calgary, middle of the business district, fired up my laptop and I was in range of a WEP network. So, if it's been a broken technology for 2 decades, which, let's face it, that's an eternity in computer years, why is it still around? There's only a few not so good reasons. The first one up there is basically WEP was around when the wireless network was first deployed, and it hasn't seen any love. It hasn't seen any upgrades over the time. More likely, there's some form of a legacy device that's mission critical that only supports WEP. The only other thing I could think of was, since wireless networks require a degree of proximity to compromise, maybe they have a network in the middle of a secure compound with, a 1 mile perimeter fence and lead/iron walls, so it really doesn't matter what they use. But what is really so bad about WEP? In short, a lot of things. First, it uses RC4, which is a string cipher that dates back to 1987. Though it has seen some minor improvements over the years, it's still the root of most of the causes. The use of RC4 requires the key generators to be kept in sync on both sides of the client and the access point. But with wireless, packet loss is expected. So the brilliant way they chose to address that was including the master key along with some random data in every single packet being transmitted. So it didn't take long to figure out that with enough sample data, computers were pretty quick at figuring out what those keys were. In today's world, you don't even need to have legitimate clients connected to the network to generate that traffic needed to crack the keys. Attacker can do that all from the outside. And its flaws have been so well documented, been around so long, there's numerous tools to crack WEP, and usually a minute, 2 minutes tops, that run automatically. So any script kiddie, including myself, can do that. So I'll just show you a quick example of how simple it is to crack WEP as well. Right. So I have my own little D-Link running here as well with the running WEP. Just make sure my VM can see my wireless card. Good, okay. I'll explain this in a second. All right. So the tool I'm using is called Wi-Fi. And I just basically told it to go ahead and start working away at cracking WEP keys. Oh, look at that, there's 2 WEP keys. There we go, still using the wild. That's not mine, so I better turn that off. Let's go with the more manual approach here now. There we go. I guess that just kind of emphasizes my point right there. Okay, now I'm attacking my own network, not someone else's. So what this tool is doing, if it works now, it's basically went out, looked for WEP networks, found a couple, and started cracking them. Unfortunately, it's not kicking off very fast. I'm waiting for that what's called a IV or initialization vector to really start ramping up. Let's see here. Well, demo guys are only half smiling upon me. Doesn't go in a second, we'll just move on. Oh, that sucks. Okay, anyways, if you're, I recorded both sessions. Yesterday's session, this took a whole 53 seconds. I was on that end of the room, so the other WEP network is down that way, in case anyone was wondering now. But we'll just move on, because we still got a lot to go over and not a lot of time. There we go. So, unfortunately, what you didn't see was how trivial it is to crack WEP, but normally that works quite well if it's the only one in the area and I didn't blow it. Anyways, so it definitely fails at access control and data confidentiality, because of course it can be, in normal circumstances, cracked quite easily, as well as once it's cracked, you can then be able to decrypt any traffic. It also has some integrity issues. There's a lot of things wrong with the packet headers are unencrypted, and they also don't include any integrity checks. That means the attacker can really redirect traffic coming to and from the access points. There's also no timestamp check or checking of the packet sequence. So what that means is the attackers could capture packets, alter them however they choose, and replay them at a later date, and the receiving client device has no way to validate whether or not it's legitimate traffic or not. It's a huge trust issue. So if you're going to use WEP in your environment, what can you do to improve security? Don't use it as the obvious one, but maybe that's not an option for you. Maybe you do have that mission critical legacy device. If that's the case, you have two options. You can either upgrade the hardware to something from this decade, but again, that's probably going to be a significant expense that management's not going to sign off on. So your other option is to implement network segregation. Separating your networks, your wireless from your wired, is a security standard best practice, and a lot of you are probably already doing this. But when you do this, you should also be doing this with strict ACL or access control list rules. This means not only blocking all the unused ports and protocols being used by the legacy equipment, but also limiting what devices on your other networks that this network can communicate with. All your other devices, smartphone, tablets, printers, should be on a different network with something that actually has better security. So, in response to all the flaws that were found in WEP, the Wi-Fi Alliance, which is a not-for-profit organization that sets standards for certification and interoperability, and whose members include some of the largest brands in the industry like Intel, Apple, Cisco, Broadcom, and many, many more. They came out with a WPA as a means to address some of those flaws in 2003. Now, WPA's first release was just meant to be a stopgap. They were already working on a new security standards, which would later be released as WPA2. So one of the things that they did was they allowed it to work with legacy hardware. Pretty much all client-side NICs could support WPA, which is a simple firmware upgrade, but your access points still need to be replaced. That being said, this was 2003, so wireless still didn't have a huge adoption, so it wasn't too bad. One of the flaws that they addressed was obviously the key management being the root cause of most of the web issues. So WPA, they still use the RC4 cipher, but they added technology called TKIP, or Temporal Key Integrity Protocol, to go along with it. TKIP basically allowed you to have a dynamic key on every single packet being transmitted. Therefore, your attacks that were happening on web would not work on WPA. They also added in some integrity checks and all that to reduce packet spoofing and replay. And it also came in two deployment options. You had WPA Personal, or PSK, which stood for Pre-Shared Key, because that's what it used for its authentication. And you had WPA 802.1x, or Enterprise. By the way, I like Star Trek. So, Enterprise can be broken down into two key components. There's the 802.1x, and then there's the EAP, or Extensible Authentication Protocol. Just like on wired networks, the 802.1x's role is to prevent any unapproved clients from associating with the network. During the approval or authentication process, the access point is limiting the communication to just those authentication packets. EAP, on the other hand, is the authentication framework. Now, the RFC, or request for comments for EAP, has, I think, 40 or 50 different standards in it, each with their own means of authentication and encapsulation. But when we're talking about wireless networks, we really just have a kind of a two main go-tos. There's the PKI, or public key infrastructure, and then there's also the remote authentication dial-in user service, or more commonly referred to as RAIDs. So, as I briefly touched on, there's been lots of improvements in transitioning from WEP to WPA, but WPA is not without its own problems. Most common attacks tend to be brute forcing the password or cracking the password hash. And since, like I mentioned, it's a new dynamic key, all the tools and techniques used for WEP don't apply here. When dealing with these networks, what the attacker does is really the only useful packets happens when a client's associating with the access point. So this process is called the four-way handshake. Our attackers, they could sit in the parking lot all day hoping to capture a four-way handshake, but they're a little smarter and also lazy. They're going to be more active. They're going to use an evil twin or laptop or one of numerous tools to basically de-authenticate, make use of those management frames, a client off a legitimate network, and then allow it to reassociate with its own network so they can capture the four-way handshake in just a matter of seconds. So there's also been numerous flaws found in TKIP. This allowed for some packet spoofing, but really, like the methods involved in exploiting TKIP right now, they are a little bit elaborate to conduct and very limited in scope. So it's more or less seen as, I guess you could say, a chink in the armor as far as that's concerned. But there's also no form of forward secrecy. What that means, if a key is compromised, any previously captured traffic can then be decrypted. Last year, I think it was, there was a group of researchers. They discovered one of the random number generators used in the WPA standard was terribly insecure. They proved that if a manufacturer used this number generator, they could not only predict the next group key, but they can also decrypt the traffic as well as inject their own traffic into the network. And also on the enterprise side, it's very common to use MS-CHAP version 2 on the wireless networks. MS-CHAP's been broken for a long time, since about 2012. It's been pretty trivial to crack. And most things wireless related. The evil twin can pose as a WPA enterprise network and capture MS-CHAP sessions, crack it. Once they do that, they not only have access to the network, but they also have wireless credentials as well as user credentials. And since it's usually always tied with Active Directory, it's a two-way street. If someone's user credentials get compromised, the attacker gains network access. So before we go into some of the defenses, just want to briefly touch on really the two major differences between the original release of WPA and WPA2. As I mentioned, WPA1 was a temporary stopgap. It was meant to work with legacy hardware. WPA2 did require new hardware on both the client and the access point side. And then the other major difference was how the encryption was handled. So with WEP, we had RC4 and all of its flaws. With WPA, TKIP was introduced to aid the process. But with WPA2, it was completely rewritten. RC4 was replaced with AES, which stands for Advanced Encryption Standard, and TKIP with CCNP, which is an abbreviated acronym for Counter Mode with Cipher Block Chaining Message Authentication Code Protocol. Useless, a little tidbit of information there. Anyways, so what can we do to improve security on WPA networks? First and foremost, we use WPA2, not WPA. Anything purchased from about 2006 onward with that Wi-Fi certified logo on it is guaranteed to support WPA2. We also, for some reason, manufacturers are still allowing you to have the option to use TKIP on a WPA2 network. Again, post 2006, that's not needed. Plus, TKIP only supports 802.11 A, B, and G. So if you use it, you're really going to slow down your network speeds. In the ideal world, we should be looking at using WPA Enterprise. In particular, EAP TLS, or Extensible Authentication Protocol through Transport Layer Security. This is leveraging your PKIs. One of the big advantages to using this is that the actual authenticating client devices are being authenticated through the PKI, not just the users. So that prevents unauthorized devices from being on the network. One of the big flaws with ETLS is that PKIs can be a pain. And though pretty much all smartphones, laptops, and so on do support ETLS, other devices like some wireless printers and that does not. Now there's also a bunch of other different EAP protocols like EAP TTLS or Tunnel Transport Layer Security. I'm not going to cover those because they're either not natively supported by Windows or some are not universally available among manufacturers. So if you're not going to use EAP TLS, your other main default option is EAP PEAP, or Protected Extensible Authentication Protocol. That is actually using MSChat version 2, but they created an encapsulated tunnel around it to secure the traffic. However, again, the evil twin can act as an enterprise access point. So we really need to harden down our client-side certificate settings if you're going to use PEAP. We want to make sure that users do not have the ability to authorize or override any certificate settings, because we all know if they are sitting in Starbucks, sipping on their soy venti vanilla bean latte with an extra shot or whatever it is, and doing their banking, and then a window pops up saying blah, 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 something techie, press OK to continue. They're going to press OK. So moving down the ladder, if you choose to use WPA2 Personal, there's a few things you can do there too to improve your security. In the hash cracking process, it can be time consuming and require a bit of resources, a lot of GPU power. So now there's tons of websites out there that will allow you to upload the four-way handshake, and if that hash has already been cracked, you get the key for free. If not, you have the option to pay a small fee to the site owner to allow their GPU farm to work away at the cracking process. And by a small fee, we're talking, like a latte, like $5, very trivial. So one of the things you can do to help protect yourself against this is use a unique SSID. Your network SSIDs are actually used in the hashing process of this four-way handshake. So using, internal or office network are bad ideas because those are on the wiggle.net's top 1,000 most used SSIDs in the world, as well as, of course, the defaults like Xfinity and Linksys, because those are the #1 and #2 most used in the world. The other thing you can do is have a long passphrase. This does not need to be crazy complex, alphanumeric, special characters, complete gibberish, hard to memorize. Because again, the goal here is to make it computationally more difficult for the attackers to crack. In the brute forcing process, it's estimated that the average pre-shared key is between 8 to 20 characters long. Therefore, most of the major word lists used in the brute forcing process do not have words exceeding that. So using something like, by the way, I'm not recommending using this as your actual password, but this is our secure password, is 27 characters long, and it makes it pretty much impossible to cryptographically decrypt. Now, the other little tidbit of information is having spaces in your password actually throws most of the cracking software for a loop. They just don't know how to handle spaces in their word list, stuff like that, so that also really aids you. The other thing to keep in mind, if you're going to use pre-shared keys, keep in mind, everyone knows it. It's fine when everyone's happy at the company, but when someone leaves, they still have access to that pre-shared key. Whether it's on good terms or not, as a good IT pro, you should be changing your pre-shared key every single time someone leaves the organization. That's obviously a huge pain, and I can admit myself to not doing that. So really, you might want to give Enterprise another look. Okay, so a couple of other quick areas to cover. Wi-Fi protected setup. This came along with WPA. It was meant to make provisioning devices easy. You could have that crazy long password, but instead authenticate your devices through a pin or pressing a button on a WPS-enabled device. Today, we really see that a lot in a lot of the small wireless printers. But of course that has flaws. The pin can be brute forced, and once the pin's brute forced, the attacker gets the key. Some manufacturers have chosen to actually release firmware updates for their old hardware. Most new ones do already have the firmware updated to detect brute forcing. But of course, attackers can be smart, and a lot of the tools that they use allow them to save their sessions. So if it stalls out because brute forcing was detected, they can stop, return at a later time, and just continue exactly where they left off. The better course of action is just disable it to begin with. If you have a fleet of devices that you want to provision with it, that's fine. Turn it on, do your provisioning, just make sure you turn it off again once you're done. The other thing is to be on the lookout for rogue users or access points. Now, for the sake of being politically correct, I'm not using the word rogue as find user bashing or anything like that. Really all it is something doing something they shouldn't. Our users aren't deliberately trying to cause harm. Really, they just want better Wi-Fi in their office. So instead of bugging you, the IT pro, quite often they'll go out to Best Buy, Fry's, or wherever, buy the cheapest router they can find, set it up themselves, and now they have better connectivity in their office. This is a huge weak point. It creates an easy target for the attackers and also an unmonitored backdoor into your network. They're quite often, have a very insecure passphrase, if one at all, and a lot of them have WPS enabled by default. Nice thing is, if you have, small business, enterprise-grade wireless solutions in place, a lot of them can scan, detect, and alert you of rogue access points found in your environment. And a lot of these solutions now, if you have enough access points in your building, can actually triangulate the location of the offender. So once found, obviously you want to disconnect it automatically and take that as an opportunity to train your end users in a very positive manner. The last one here is a bit of a stretch goal, but you want to work towards having a network that supports protected management frames exclusively. Protected management frames has been out since around 2009 when Cisco developed it, but there's been a few things that have slowed down its adoption. I guess I should explain what it is too. Basically, as I mentioned, most of these attacks I gave examples of involve deauthorization, deauthentication, stuff like that. Protected management frames prevents those unauthorized requests from actually being handled in the first place. But the two main flaws that, I shouldn't say flaws, but requirements that slow down its adoption is this needs to be supported on both the client device and the access point. And for it to be really of any effect, it needs to be enabled exclusively. The nice thing is the Wi-Fi Alliance, they have made this mandatory part of their 802.11 AC certifications. So if you're doing any hardware refreshes, you should look for devices that support that. And on their website there, they have a product finder page where you can actually specifically look for access points, hardware, phones, everything that meets that certification. So, in summary, Open Wireless bad, educate your users, don't choose what? It's WPA 2, not WPA. Ideal world, we're going to use ETLS. But if you're going to use PEEP, make sure you lock down those client-side certificate settings. Going personal, two key things: unique SSID, use a long password, make sure WPS is disabled, and the ultimate stretch goal, work towards having a network that supports management frames or protected management frames exclusively. All right, that's all I had. Is there any questions?
Screen back for a second.
Yep.
Do you think it's worth disabling the SSID radio, like disabling the name?
No, there's no use in that. All the tools for, sorry if anyone didn't hear, disabling the SSID name. All the discovery tools for networks, they're going to see hidden networks. Beacon requests are going to give away the name of the networks anyways. There's so many different ways around it. The only time that that's somewhat used for legitimate purposes is say traveling network. So think of cop cars with their own access points, stuff like that inside of it. They're never in the same place for very long. They're always moving around. They're not going to come up on anyone's radar unless they're specifically targeting the vehicle. Then it doesn't matter anyways. But it just kind of security by obscurity in those unique scenarios is good, but general purpose, no. Yeah, in the back.
So regarding the open Wi-Fi, I can imagine some of my users think, oh, well, I have a VPN client, that's the IP stack or open VPN. I'm good with that. Or that's not really good. Do we have any good arguments against that?
No, if they're going on an open network and using the VPN is their very first step, that's the key. If they've already checked their email, did a bunch of other stuff and said, oh crap, there's a larger window for an attack to take place, but if establishing the VPN connection first is the first step, the window for or damage or being compromised is very small. Yes, sir.
Do you have a preferred VPN?
No, I don't have a preferred VPN. Quite often, whatever your firewall manufacturer is going to the corporate network, whatever they're using. There's tons of ones out there, like the hotspot shields and all that kind of stuff. They all work very good for securing it at the local area, protecting at the hotspot. But a lot of them do not necessarily securing it at the other end of the tunnel. So there's too many out there to really know who's kind of above board and who's not. But they all work at the coffee shop level anyways.
Great.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned MAC address filtering at all. How effective is it? Is it cracked or
MAC address filtering, it's trivial. So if you only have MAC address filtering on, as an attacker, I'm going to scan your network. I'm going to see all these devices. If I can't connect, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a MAC address, clone my MAC address, match it, kick yours off the network, and mine will automatically go on because I'm using that same MAC address.
So it's interesting. It's pretty useless.
Yeah, in real world, it is. It really is like the number of tools. It's like copy paste. I want to use this MAC address. Away we go.
That makes me feel great.
Again, the moral of this session is wireless sucks. Great. Yes, at the back.
What's your opinion on wireless IDS systems?
Good. There's IDS systems. There's also, I guess I will touch on some of the technologies. There's a lot of different technologies, not going to IDS space, but that allow you to augment your security. Like vendors will have like a dynamic pre-shared key where each user can have their own pre-shared key, stuff like that. Those are options to look at. They're not free. They're not universally supported. You're going to need to go with like a Ruckus Wireless or Aruba and get their clear pass, stuff like that. So, if you're a medium-sized business, that's something to definitely look at, is using some of those systems. Intrusion prevention, scanning. You can do that, but if you're not doing the actual, security steps to improve the security, any script kiddie is going to bang on any wireless network that you can see. So, unless you know that someone's knocking on your door, I guess you could say. Yes, sir.
Along with VPN, do you recommend?
That has a different purpose. You can split tunnel. Actually, no, I wouldn't recommend it. Now that I think about it, because when you're split tunneling, your traffic is going to the internal network. That's going through the tunnel. The other one's going through the access point, so that's actually leaving the encapsulation of the VPN tunnel. So no, that wouldn't help you. It'd make it faster for some users, but no.
What would you recommend for channels? Like what channels to use? Best practice.
If you could go 5 only. Most devices are smarter than we are, so you use the auto scan setting. But 4 is very crowded. You have to invest more money into cracking 5 just because the wire radios are more expensive. So my little cow pie there, that's only 2.4. I can only do 2.4, but that was a $10 adapter. My Wi-Fi Pineapple, that's a $200 device that supports 5. So going 5 alone helps you out.
You talked about man-in-the-middle attacks for HTTPS.
Yes.
How do you prevent that or?
That's end user training. Really, 99% of the ways to do a man-in-the-middle attack, the users are going to get the browser warning because it's going to be an untrusted certificate. So that's just you get the warning, stop, disconnect, whatever. That's a training factor. Yeah, we'll go here.
What about some of the, what have you heard about the new security standards, some of the new ones coming out, like 802.11ax, so?
To be honest, I haven't looked too much into that one yet. Usually they're in the works, so that means we still got quite some time before we're going to see it in devices. AC was in the works. I think it was about 2-3 years before we actually started seeing devices that support it. So.
I know we kind of just touched on it, but I know you can't disable the 2.4 channel because a lot of user devices still use that. But is there a security difference between the two different megahertz channels?
No, not really. The only security difference would be between 2.4 and 5 is 2.4 goes through walls better. It's going to bleed out into your parking lot, all that kind of stuff. So one of the things you can do is you can reduce your transmit powers, survey around your buildings, make sure it's not bleeding out of your walls. So someone, if they want to compromise you, they're going to have to get inside first.
Thank you.
No problem. Perfect. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So if you had an organization that had like 10 or 15 different locations across the city and you wanted to keep your Wi-Fi consistent across there, how often do you recommend changing passwords, and is there anything like a radius server that you could authenticate your users with? You recommend?
Well, yeah, like if you're using PEEP, right? That's going to be using your radius server. That's going to be authenticating. You can tie it into Active Directory, stuff like that. So then when using that, it is making sure user credentials are guarded, not being compromised, and then those client-side certificate settings. But yeah, that's basically PEEP is going to be leveraging the radius servers. Yes, sir.
Quick one on the beacon attack. Is that only problematic if they've remembered passwords, if they've checked box?
That's right. Yeah. If they don't have the box checked, it's not sending out beacons.
Okay.
But the corporate one, that's probably going to be checked by default. There's always going to be some, and I think I mentioned it. It gets worse and worse when you want to get targeted, because I could go through that list. I could see the phones. I could see what SSIDs were tied to that, and I can say, okay, I want to target you. So your device didn't connect to me, but I know the beacons you're sending out. Now I'm going to broadcast those beacons. So some phones and devices will only connect if that network's actually being broadcasted. Others will connect if the beacon is just responded to. So you can actually improve the chances greater and greater just by being a little more aggressive and do a little more profiling on your targets. Yes?
Do you know if there's a group policy that connect automatically to Windows?
Not that one. I did some looking, I couldn't find it. The certificate settings, those can be done with policies, but not that automatically connect. Again, wireless sucks.
So you would still stick with a wired company?
100%. I run wireless. I know the dangers. I have it segregated. I know what connects to it. But all my devices, when I'm in my home office or my work office, when my laptop's docked, my wireless is actually off. Wired, it's faster, it's more secure, it's better in every way other than I can't walk around the room with it. All right, perfect. Thank you for your time.